I can remember a time not too long ago when people used to really complain that there were no more public intellectuals. And I think some people are tempted now to hold the new generation of public intellectuals to a very low standard because they're just so delighted that these people exist at all, that they're on TV at all, that they're on the radio. I see that a lot with guys like Noam Chomsky, to be perfectly honest. A lot of his supporters, not necessarily even because they're left-wing, a lot of people just feel delighted that someone who's a seemingly respectable university professor saying seemingly intellectually sophisticated things manages to get into the mainstream media, and they celebrate that fact. But really, we should hold them to the same high standards they propose for themselves. And a guy like Michael Shermer has emerged lately from what I would call the new atheist movement, the attempt to kind of repackage atheism and secularism as some kind of political cause in the United States. He has emerged as a public intellectual, as someone who comments on politics, and who frames himself as a moral and ethical philosopher in our times. So given that high standard, please consider the following quotation that I'm going to read to you. That's sounds like something you might expect to see, I don't know, written in a chat room on a Reddit page by some anonymous commenter. Quote, "I don't mind eating cows and fish, but dolphins and whales have big brains, and they're cool, so I don't think we should kill them. Period." Close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Shermer, leader of the Reason Rally, proponent of so-called critical thinking, says, "I don't mind eating cows and fish, but dolphins and whales have big brains and they're cool, so I don't think we should kill them." I will provide the link below this video to the context that comes from. From my perspective, the paragraph that's embedded in does not make it sound any better. I think it makes it sound rather worse. He says, "Oh, well, you know, I drive a sport utility vehicle because I haul around bicycles, books, and dogs, but as soon as there's a hybrid available in the right size, I'll buy it instead." Weakness and strength are not morally neutral things. One of the strange influences in our culture, I think, is that so many of us grow up reading comic books, reading about Batman, Superman, these types of characters, where the question of strength, the question of ability, is never the moral puzzle before people. It's striking to me here with Shermer, and also in reading and listening to Sam Harris. Boy, I'm almost proud that I've forgotten that guy's name. The material from Sam Harris lately, I'm really struck by the apparent weakness of these men, the hyper-indulgentism, the tremendous inability to put off, to defer even the slightest of pleasures for the sake of a moral principle. That was in Sam Harris's excuses for not being vegan before, and it's in Michael Shermer's excuses for not being vegan now. I remember some comments from Sam Harris where he was talking about his problems with the morality of what cellular phones are made from, because cellular phones use minerals that come from certain conflict zones. And the guy interviewing him pointed out, "Oh, you know, there's this website where you can buy a morally sourced cell phone. Then the cell phone, apparently, they give you a guarantee, and if you want to, you can look through all the fine print. They tell you where all the components come from. They guarantee none of them are produced by slave labor. From the mines through to the factories, they all meet certain conditions. So if you want to, you can go to this website. You can get cell phones that have this seal of approval." And Sam Harris's response is, "I don't believe that being a morally good person should mean that you have to have a bad phone." So your morality is not a sufficiently high priority in your life that you would be willing to get a slightly less fashionable, a slightly less sleek, a slightly less featured cellular phone than the one you are now using. Let me let you in on a little secret, folks. you may have noticed I have these books sitting around my desk all the time, and I'm always complaining that I look exhausted when I'm on camera because I am exhausted and so on. I have never owned a cellular phone. Never in my life. When I was in China once, I borrowed somebody's cellular phone for, I guess, about 2 weeks. That's it. That's the only experience I've ever had with cellular phones. And I needed that cellular phone because I was looking for work. I was trying to get a job, and I couldn't get any other kind of phone number. No other exceptions. So I'm not telling you I haven't owned a cellular phone, but actually I was using my girlfriend's phone all this time. No. It's possible to live in the 21st century without a cellular phone. And I don't feel I lead a less meaningful life because I feel I lead a more meaningful life. But anyway, again, if you're just some anonymous guy commenting on an internet message board, okay, fine. I'm not going to hold you to some terribly high standard. But these guys put themselves forward as major intellectuals in positions of public leadership. And this is both the stupidity of what they have to say on some of the crucial moral issues of our time, moral issues we can actually make a difference about. I mean, I'm sorry, if you want to have an opinion about ISIS, the odds are you're not one of the people whose opinion matters, is going to make any kind of a difference. You want to have an opinion about veganism, it's going to make a difference. If you're a university professor, like Michael Shermer is, you want to have an opinion about vivisection on your campus, in your university, where you're a member of tenured faculty, that's going to make a difference. You can stop buying leather today. You can stop eating meat tomorrow. You can go vegan now. This is a positive difference in the world that is within your power to make. All kinds of other questions are merely hypothetical. There's another article that Michael Shermer wrote on this, in which he reflects that he saw some documentary film, might as well get it right, Speciesism, the movie. I've seen him comment elsewhere on the internet that he did see Earthlings and had some kind of emotional reaction to it. So he'd watched these various pro-vegan documentary films. He has his kind of humming and hawing in response to it. Yeah. Just to digress for half a moment here. Where does Michael Shermer live? Altadena, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, a short drive or a long bicycle ride outside of downtown Los Angeles. There are probably fewer places in the world that it is easier to be vegan than the suburbs of LA. I mean, honestly, I used to live in Saskatchewan, in the middle of Canada. It's tough to be vegan in Saskatchewan. It is. I used to live in the south of France. It's very different. But in some ways, being vegan in the south of France also is tough. Los Angeles, Southern California, how low a priority are these moral principles that you preach? You, Michael Shermer, these guys. Again, if it was somebody else, if this was the coach of a football team, I was quoting saying, well, I don't mind eating cows and fish, but dolphins and whales have big brains and they're cool, so I don't think we should kill them. If that was the coach of the Oakland Raiders, I'm dating myself with that cultural reference, Oakland Raiders, nobody would complain, okay? But you're putting yourself forward as a major public intellectual, author, raconteur, leader of a social movement, and this is the level of engagement of this. Okay, sorry. In the second link I'm providing below the video, he has his sort of indifferent attitude towards these issues he's just seen in a documentary film, and he comments that various people make the analogy between treatment of cows and pigs in slaughterhouses and what happened in the Holocaust, the extermination of Jews during World War II, during the Nazi period in Central Europe and Eastern Europe and all over the place. You know what I'm talking about. Quote, historian Charles Patterson draws the analogy in his 2002 book, Eternal Treblinka, and De Vries makes visual reference to it by comparing the layout of factory farm buildings to that of prisoner barracks at Auschwitz. The flaw in the analogy is in the motivation of the perpetrators. As someone who has written a book on the Holocaust, titled Denying History, 2009, I see a vast moral gulf between farmers and Nazis. Even factory farm corporate suits, motivated by profits, are still far down the moral ladder from Adolf Eichmann and Heinrich Himmler. There are no signs at factory farms reading Arbeit macht frei. Yet I cannot fully rebuke those who equate factory farms with concentration camps. While working as a graduate student in experimental psychology in an animal lab in 1978 at California State University, it was my job to dispose of lab rats that had outlived our experiments. I was instructed to euthanize them with chloroform, but I hesitated. I wanted to take them up into the local hills and let them go, figuring that death by predation or starvation was better than gassing. But releasing lab animals was illegal, so I exterminated them with gas. It was one of the most dreadful things I ever had to do. Close quote. Yeah, there were many differences between the production of meat on factory farms and the Holocaust. You know what one of them is, Michael Shermer? If I had to ask you to join the army and fight in a war in which you would quite likely be injured or die to end the Holocaust, I would be asking quite a lot of you. If you were in France and I asked you to join a unit of the French resistance, to in effect join a terrorist group fighting against the Nazis, to live in secrecy, to live a double life, to smuggle munitions, perhaps, across the border into France, to fight against the Nazis for years, depriving yourself of normal food, shelter, work, relaxation, family, friends, etc., that would be asking a lot. And hundreds of thousands, millions of people did that. Millions of people died fighting the Nazis. All that anyone is asking you to do to address the animal Holocaust, I'll put my hands in the air in quotation marks, the quote-unquote animal Holocaust, is to stop eating meat and dairy, is to live a vegan lifestyle in Southern California, in Los Angeles, in what is probably the world capital of luxury quality vegan restaurants. And you, with your handsome income as a university professor, with your luxury home in Altadena, California, with your SUV that you feel you can't give up until you have a bigger hybrid because you like driving around with your dogs and your bicycles loaded into the back, you can do it. It's asking an incredibly small sacrifice from you. And again, to me, in my mind, what leaps out is, Sam Harris, moral philosopher. You can write a whole book about moral philosophy, but you don't think you can use a slightly less fashionable cell phone for the sake of your morals? What the hell does that say about you? Oh, yeah, so, Michael Shermer, you say you have this emotional connection to animals because you had to gas some of them to death when you were working in a lab. Something to do with vivisection, some kind of animal experimentation. I don't know what exactly. And you admit that there's a similarity between what you've seen in these documentaries and Holocaust. What? You just can't give up the hamburgers? Like, what the hell does that say about you? It says that you should not be in a position of leadership, neither as an author nor as a political leader, etc. It says a lot about you, Michael Shermer. It's a damning judgment on your character. Now, in case you hadn't guessed, I am of Jewish ethnic origin, and I do have relatives who died in the Holocaust. In my life, I met and knew one Holocaust survivor, and I knew people who were old enough to have memories of that war on different sides. I knew one guy who grew up in the shadow of the Nazi side. He was a child during World War II, but his parents were Nazis and so on. I'm not really old enough to have a direct connection to all that history, but I have some indirect connections to the echoes of that chapter of history. You know what? There were many moral differences. I mean, analogies by definition, a comparison between two things, doesn't presume they have a lot in common. They might just have one thing in common. I can have two different books on my desk here that are both red. They're comparable only in the color of the book. They're about different topics. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with an analogy, with a comparison between two fundamentally dissimilar things. But you know what? As Hobbes says in his famous book Leviathan, man is a wolf to man. Homo homini lupus est. When you look at the history of political massacres in the history of human civilization, the Nazis are one example. The communists have plenty of examples. To give another funny example, within Spain, fascist Spain, they massacred people on the pretext that those people were members of a Freemason conspiracy. Totally factious, totally false allegations, but it was enough of an excuse to start rounding up enemies of the fascist regime and executing them. In large numbers, too. You'd be surprised. That one's less famous. In all of those massacres, though, the reality is that human beings really are a threat to other human beings. One of the justifications given by Nazis themselves for why the Holocaust happened was that they didn't want it to be possible for the next generation of their enemies to take revenge on them. So there is fear involved. Nobody has this justification for killing cows. Now look, I live in Canada. There is this justification for killing bears. Sometimes people get attacked by bears here, and they actually have to shoot and kill the bears in self-defense. That's no joke. That really happens in Canada. If you've lived in Canada long enough, you've probably met someone who's had that experience. It's not that uncommon. Depends what part of Canada you're from. Sure, bear attacks, that's one thing. But the production of food that nobody needs and that is not good for anyone's health, that is a scientific fact, is bad for everybody's health, universally unhealthy, universally unnecessary food. To produce that through the suffering and extermination of animals that are not a threat to you, this will never have the excuse of self-defense. This will never even have the excuse of self-aggrandizement. Nobody is building an empire this way. Nobody is, for example, conquering Russia through this violence. Nobody is expanding their power or what have you. I am not saying this to excuse mass murder in the history of the world. Not at all. But in most mass murders, there is either the perceived or actual fear that if one side doesn't kill the other side, then somehow circumstances will be reversed and the other side will be the ones doing the killing. In China and Cambodia under communism, part of the whole reason for the fever pitch of exterminating class enemies was exactly the fear that if you don't kill them now, the counter-revolutionaries will turn around and they'll get you. Look into the eyes of a cow sometime, Michael Shermer. Nobody is afraid that the cows are going to take over the way the communists were afraid that counter-revolutionaries were going to take over. Nobody is afraid that the pigs are part of a conspiracy, the way that the fascists in Spain were afraid that the Freemasons were all part of a conspiracy. And, look sometime at the diagram of a cow's skull and the size of its brain. Because your justification for eating meat, Michael Shermer, is, quote, I don't mind eating cows and fish, but dolphins and whales have big brains and they're cool.